Somewhere around 80, I started giving up explaining myself, one thing at a time, and the relief arrived the same afternoon every single time. I'm Walter, 82, retired carpenter, 9 years on my own since I lost my Helen. If you're forever handing somebody a reason for how you live, this one is for you. Start with number 1 and stay for number 8, because that's the one that was doing the most damage. Number 1. I stopped explaining why I still live in this house on my own. For about 3 years I had a speech, a proper one with about 5 parts to it. The shop's 30 steps out the back, the neighbor's got a key, my son comes up monthly, I've a light on by 5:30, the stairs are manageable. 5 reasons. And I'd give the whole thing to anybody who raised it. And some of them hadn't even raised it. They'd only asked how I was getting on. Here's what I say now. I like it here. That's it. 4 words. And then I ask them about something else. And I want to be plain about what changed. Because it isn't that I stopped caring what people think. I care what my children think, and I always will. It's that a man with a 5-part speech is a man who believes he's on trial. Nobody put me on trial. I built the courtroom myself and then stood in it for 3 years answering questions nobody had actually asked. The day I put the speech down, the subject got smaller. Not settled, smaller. It stopped being the thing that had to be got through before we could talk about anything else. If you're walking this road alone, subscribe so you don't have to walk it alone. All right, number 2. And I'd say this first, because the speech has got a good reason behind it. You built it after somebody frightened you. Mine came out of a conversation at this kitchen table 3 years ago with my 2 children, who came up worried and had a folder with them. That was a fair conversation, but I walked out of it with an argument assembled, and I carried that argument around Penobscot County for 3 years, deploying it at people who had nothing to do with it. The woman at the post office is not your children. The fellow at the hardware store did not bring a folder. Now, I stopped explaining why I go to bed at 8 o'clock. I'm up at 5:15. Have been for 60 years. Which means that by about 8 in the evening I'm done. And I bank the fire and go up. And that's been the arrangement for a long while. People find that funny. Not unkindly, but it comes up. And there's a certain amount of remarking on it. My son laughed at me about it once, 4 or 5 years ago. Said something about the early nights, in the way a son does. And I explained. Of course I did. I told him about the 5:15 in the shop at 9, and how a man who's up before the light hasn't much left by 8. And I was about 4 sentences in before I noticed that I was defending my own bedtime to somebody who loves me and had only made a joke. He wasn't asking for an account. He was being pleasant. That's the thing I'd want anybody to hear about number 2. A good deal of what we explain was never a question in the first place. Somebody makes a remark, and a man who's been on his own a while hears it as a challenge, because he's got into the habit of being challenged. And out comes the speech, and now there's a small awkward moment where there wasn't one. Now when it comes up, I say, I'm up at 5, so 8 suits me. And what I've noticed since, and this is the part that surprised me, is that people are interested. They ask about the 5:15. Somebody at the diner told me he'd tried it for a fortnight. You cannot have that conversation from inside a defense. Nobody's curious about a man who's justifying himself. They're only curious about a man who's telling them how he lives. That's a trait I'd not have believed, and it's the one that's improved my week the most. A justification closes a subject. A plain statement opens one. Same information, same bedtime, entirely different result. And the whole difference is whether there's an argument attached to the end of it. Number 3, I stopped explaining why there's no television in this house. There was one. It broke sometime in the 2nd year after Helen died, and I never replaced it. And I've told that story elsewhere, and I'll not do the whole of it again. But for a good while, when it came up, I'd give people the reasons. that I'd had it on 11 hours a day and couldn't name a program, that I'd been using it to cover the quiet, that the quiet turned out to be where the thinking happens. All true. And all of it landed as a criticism of the person I was talking to. Every single time. Because they've got a television, and I just delivered a small sermon about why I haven't. I could see it happening, and I could not work out how to stop. Now I say, it broke, and I never got round to replacing it. Which is also true, it did break, and I didn't. And it ends the subject in about 4 seconds, and nobody goes away feeling got at. That's a thing I'd not have understood at 70. An explanation is nearly always an argument in disguise, and the person receiving it can feel the argument even when you meant none. There's a version of this that catches men my age particularly, and I'll name it. We've all got a few things we've given up that other people haven't. The television, the drink, the driving at night, whatever it is. And every one of those is a choice we made for our own reasons. But say the reasons out loud to a man who hasn't made the same choice, and you have, without meaning to, told him something about himself. I did that for years, and I could not work out why perfectly friendly conversations kept going slightly cold on me. Now I give the plainest version available, and I leave the reasoning in this house where it belongs. Before the next one, tell me in the comments the one thing you're tired of explaining to people. Just the thing. I'd like to see them, and I have a feeling a good many of us are explaining the same 3 or 4. I read every single comment, and I answer as many as these old hands allow. Number 4. I stopped explaining why I'm still out in that shop at 82. Shouldn't you be resting? That's the phrase. I get it perhaps once a month, and it's always kindly meant. And I used to answer it properly. I'd talk about the hands, and about how a man who stops using them loses them, and about how the shop is the one place I've reliably been myself for 9 years. That's all true, and none of it belongs in a hardware store. Here's what I say now. I'd rather not. 3 words, said pleasantly, and it works every time. Because it isn't a defense, it's a preference, and nobody argues with a man's preference. Now I want to say the honest half of number 4. I did stop some things, and I did not explain those either. The roof's off my list. Gave that up at 78, and I've held to it. My son handles it, or I hire it. I don't go up any ladder at all anymore. I split less at a stretch than I did, and I stop when I said I'd stop, and I've a rail on those stairs that I built myself out of ash, because at least then it was mine. Every one of those was a genuine concession, and I made all of them quietly. Which is the point. A man who explains why he's still working is a man who feels he owes an account of his own capabilities. And once you're in the business of accounting for what you can still do, you're also in the business of accounting for what you can't, and that is a conversation with no floor to it. So I stop both. I don't explain the shop, and I don't announce the roof. I've simply got a list of what I do and a list of what I don't, and neither of them is anybody's business but mine and my children's. And I'd add the thing I use now to decide which list something goes on, since it saves a great deal of arguing with myself. It isn't, can I still do this? That question has no good answer at 82, and a man will talk himself into anything. It's, what does it cost me to be wrong? Wrong about a ladder means lying in a yard in November until somebody happens by. Wrong about a round of ash means I put them all down and go inside tired. Same stubbornness, applied with some arithmetic. The ladder goes, the wood stays. Number 5. I stopped explaining why I cook a proper Sunday dinner for one man. Roast chicken, the good potatoes, a vegetable. Started about 12:30, on the table by 3, and it takes the whole of the early afternoon. People find that either sad or excessive depending on who's asking, and I've had both. And I used to explain, I'd say something about how the institution doesn't require a crowd, or about how a man who eats standing at a counter is telling himself something. It's true, and it's also a great deal to hand somebody who asked what you're doing Sunday. Now I say, I like a roast. And here's what I've worked out about the explaining, and it's the same shape as the others. Every explanation contains an admission, and the admission is, I know this looks odd, and I'm going to make it acceptable to you. That's what's actually happening. Every single time. And 9 of those in a week, for 4 or 5 years, is a considerable weight, and you do not notice it until you set one down. The day I stopped justifying that Sunday dinner, I enjoyed it more. Genuinely, and immediately, that same afternoon. Because I'd stopped eating it while composing a defense of it. That's the piece in the title, and it isn't mystical. It's just that a man who isn't preparing an answer has more attention available for the thing itself. And I'd guess that's true of a good deal more than a roast. I spent about 4 years half present in my own life, because some portion of me was always composing. Composing the answer for the next fellow who asked about the house. Composing the reasons for the shop. Working out how to put the bedtime so it wouldn't sound like a decline. You cannot do that and also be in a room. That's what came back. And it came back in pieces rather than all at once. A Sunday afternoon, that was just a Sunday afternoon. A conversation at that counter that I was actually in, rather than managing. Nobody warns you that the explaining is taking that from you. It doesn't feel like it's taking anything. It feels like being polite. Number 6. I stopped explaining why I still drive. This one is different from the others, and I'll be careful with it, because it's the one where somebody might reasonably want an answer. I'm 82, and I drive. Mostly local, the diner, the town, up to see a woman named Dot on a Sunday with a jar of soup. I've been to Portland twice this year, and I did not enjoy the second half of either drive. For a long while, when it came up, I'd produce the evidence. My eyes are checked. I don't go out in the dark much now. I haven't had so much as a scrape since 1994. All accurate. And all of it, I eventually understood, aimed at winning an argument rather than answering a worry. So what I've done instead is not explain, but decide. I've written down what would stop me. It's on a piece of yellow paper, in a drawer in Portland, and both my children have seen it. And it says that the day I have a near miss, that's my fault. Mine, not somebody else's. The keys go. And I told them something harder, which is, don't wait for me to notice. If Elaine down the road tells you she's seen something, or if the fellow at the diner mentions something, you come and tell me, and I will believe you over myself. That took some saying. I said it anyway, in daylight, in a calm year. And what it bought me is that the subject is closed. Nobody raises it. There's nothing to raise, because the answer's already written, and it's in my own handwriting. That's the difference between explaining and deciding. An explanation has to be given again every time. A decision only has to be made once. And that's the one thing on this list I'd press on anybody, because it works on nearly everything. Wherever you're doing a lot of explaining, there's very likely a decision you haven't made. That's been true of every item on tonight's list when I've gone back and checked. The house. I explained it for 3 years and then wrote down the 3 conditions under which I'd leave. And the explaining stopped inside a month. The driving, same. The shop. I made my own list of what's on and off, and stopped defending either. The explaining is what a man does instead of deciding. It's the sound of an unmade decision, going round and round, being described to people who can't make it for him. Make the decision, and write it down, and tell the 2 people who need to know. Then there's nothing left to explain, and the piece in the title of this talk is very largely that. Number 7. I stopped explaining why I've not remarried. It comes up. Less than you'd think, and more than nothing, and it comes from good people who'd like to see me looked after. I had a whole answer for it. About Helen, and about 54 years, and about how a man doesn't improve on that at 82. And it was all true, and I've stopped giving it. Because the answer is nobody's business. And because giving it invited more of the conversation rather than less. Now I say, I'm all set, thanks. That's a main expression. And it does a great deal of work up here. But I'll say the honest part to you, since we're sitting here. It isn't loyalty. I want that clear. Because I think people assume it is, and there's a sort of nobility attached that I've not earned. It's that I had the thing. 54 years of it. And the notion of starting the whole enormous business again at 82. The explaining of myself from the beginning. The learning of another person's whole history. The being learned by somebody. I have not got the appetite for it, and I'd not do it well. Other men do want it, and I'd think none the less of one. I've known two who married again in their 70s, and both did well out of it. And one of them told me his second wife saved his life, and I believe him. So it's not a principle. It's a preference, and it's mine. And I've stopped submitting it for review. And I'd say the same to the widows, who I gather get this a good deal more than we do, and get it earlier. Whatever you've decided, it's yours. You do not owe a room full of people the reasoning, and the reasoning is nearly always more private than the decision is. I'm all set. Thanks is a complete sentence. It has been a complete sentence in this state for 200 years. Number 8 now, and this is the one I promised you. Stay with me. Number 8. Remember I said number 8 was doing the most damage. Here it is. I stopped explaining why I'm all right. That's the deepest one on this list, and it took me until about 80 to see it. Here's what I did for years, and I'd guess a good many of you are doing it right now. Somebody would ask how I was. I'd say good. And then, every time, I'd produce the evidence. I'd tell them about the shop and the chest of drawers on the bench. About the Sunday calls from my son and the Thursday calls from my daughter. About the letters from my granddaughter. About the fire and the routine and the fact that I sleep through most nights now. 4 sentences, sometimes 6, all of it delivered in support of the word good. And I thought I was making conversation. I was submitting a case. Now this took me 9 years to work out, and I'd put it in front of anybody in this position. A man who is producing evidence that he's all right is a man who does not believe he'll be taken at his word. That's the tell. That's what the explaining actually is. It's not warmth, and it's not detail. It's a fellow who has decided in advance that his word alone is not going to be sufficient. And where did I get that idea? From about 2 years of people looking at me with a face on and clearly not believing me when I said fine, because in that stretch I wasn't fine, and they were right not to believe me. So I learned to bring proof. Perfectly sensible adaptation to a real situation. And then the situation changed, and I went on bringing proof for another 4 years, at people who'd have believed me the first time. The day I stopped, and I can nearly put a date on it, it was a conversation at that diner. The relief was immediate, and it was physical. Because there is a particular kind of tiredness that comes from advocating for yourself. And I'd been doing it in every exchange with every human being for years. And I had entirely stopped noticing the weight. Now somebody asks, and I say good, and I stop. And they believe me. That's the part nobody would guess. They believe me considerably more than they did when I was giving them 6 sentences of support. Because 6 sentences of support is what a man gives when the first answer isn't true. Now, I want to say the other half of this, because it could go wrong, and I'd not want it to. Stopping the explaining is not stopping the telling. There are 4 or 5 people in my life who get the whole account. My daughter, on a Thursday, gets an honest answer And she gets it even when the honest answer is that the week's been poor. My son gets it. Marie gets it. And she's the one I don't have to manage at all. And here's what happened when I stopped spending it on everybody. There was more of it left for them. That's the arithmetic nobody explained to me. A man only has so much honest account in him in a given week. Spread it across every fellow at every counter, and there's nothing left by Thursday, and your daughter gets a summary. Give a small true answer to the counter, and the whole of it to the 4 people who can actually do something with it, and everybody's better off, including you. And I'd give you the test I use now, because I had to build one. Can this person do anything with what I'm about to say? That's it. If they can, if it's my daughter who's a nurse, or my son, or a woman who's 9 years into the same business I'm in, then it's the whole of it, and no editing. If they can't, it's a small true answer. Not a cheerful lie. A small true one. February's been long. The shop's going well. This week's been quiet. All of those are honest, and none of them hands a man in a hardware store something he has no way to put down. Now, there's a harder version of number 8, and I'll say it, because it's the one that nearly went wrong for me. For about 18 months, I gave the small true answer to everybody, including my daughter. That's the failure mode, and I'd want anybody trying this to know it's there. You get good at the short answer, and it works, and it's comfortable, and then one Thursday, you give it to the one person on earth who was actually asking. Susan noticed. She generally does. She said something on a Thursday call in about the 3rd winter that I've thought about ever since. She said, "Pop, you talk about Mom like you're embarrassed about it." And I said something dismissive, because that's what I do. She let it go, because she's clever about that. But she was right, and what she'd caught was not embarrassment. It was that I'd got so practiced at the abbreviated version that I'd stopped being able to produce the other one at all. So the rule now is that Thursday gets the truth, and I say it even when the truth is nothing much. This week's been poor, and I don't know why. 6 seconds, and it keeps the channel open for the week it matters. Because a man who says good for 104 Thursdays in a row has effectively switched the instrument off. And that instrument is the only thing that'll catch him when he starts to slide, since he certainly won't catch himself. There's one more piece of number 8, and it's the part I'd most want a man my age to hear. The evidence giving is exhausting in a way that does not present as exhaustion. It doesn't feel like tiredness. It feels like people being a bit much. It feels like not fancying the church supper this month, and then not fancying it the month after. That's what it looks like from inside. A man who is slowly finding company less appealing. And the reason isn't that he's gone antisocial. It's that every single exchange has become a small performance, and performances are tiring. And after 4 years of them, a fellow starts declining invitations without ever knowing why. I nearly went that way. That's the honest account of my 78th and 79th years. I was turning things down, and I'd have told you it was my age. It was not my age. It was that I could not face producing the case again. Stop producing the case, and the invitations get easy again. That happened to me within about a month, and I have not turned much down since. Number 9. And the last one is the one I explained longest and hardest, and gave up most gratefully. I stopped explaining why I talk to my wife. I do. Out loud, most nights, at the lamp on my side of a bed we had for 46 years. Good night, Helen. Sometimes more than that. And in the morning. And in the shop. And standing at that east window when the light comes up on a row of cedars she picked out in 1971 over my objection. 9 years, and it has not stopped. And I've given up expecting it to. Now, for about 4 years, on the rare occasions it came up, I would explain the daylights out of it. I'd say I know she isn't there. I'd say I'm a carpenter from Maine. I believe in what I can touch and I can't touch her. I'd say it's a habit 54 years old, and habits don't come out of a man in a hurry. I'd say I'm not confused about the situation. All of that is true, and I meant every word. But look at what it is. Every one of those sentences is a man defending himself against a charge that nobody has brought. Not one person had ever suggested I was losing my grip. I'd invented the accusation and then answered it, at length, unprompted, to people who had said nothing at all. Now I don't explain it. If it comes up, I say, I talk to her most nights. And I'll tell you what happened the first time I did that, without the defense attached. It was Marie, over lunch, about 4 years ago. And I said it plainly and did not follow it with anything. And she put her fork down and said she'd been doing the same thing for years and had never told a living soul because she thought it meant something was wrong with her. Two people in their 80s, both doing the same sensible thing, both ashamed of it, neither one ever mentioning it, until one of them said it without an apology on the end. That's what the explaining costs. It isn't only the weight on you, it's that a defense tells everybody in the room the thing is indefensible, and then nobody who's doing the same thing can admit to it either. I'd not have got that hour with Marie if I'd led with I know she isn't there. Now I'll tell you what it actually is, since I've stopped explaining it to everybody and can therefore afford to say it properly once. For 54 years, Helen was the person I told things to. Not the important things particularly, the ordinary ones. What I'd noticed, what happened on the job, what I thought about something I'd heard on the radio. The impulse to tell her was as constant as breathing, and it was the fundamental way I processed being alive. Something would happen. I'd formulate it, and I'd tell Helen. When she died, the impulse did not die with her. It kept firing. Dozens of times a day. Something would happen, and the impulse would come. And then it would hit the wall of her absence. And every single time was a small, fresh discovery that she wasn't there. So I let it go where it wanted to go. That's all it is. There's nothing mystical in it, and there's no belief attached that I'd have to defend to anybody. A man who has talked to somebody every day for 54 years does not stop being a man who talks to her because a heart stopped in October. And there's a practical side to it that I only worked out after about 4 years of doing it. It keeps me articulate about my own condition. When you put a thing into words for another person, even one who isn't there, you have to actually formulate it. You can't just have the vague feeling. You have to say what the feeling is. The evenings I say things out loud to her are the evenings I know most clearly what's actually going on with me. And knowing what's going on with me at 82 is about the most useful thing I can do for myself and for the people who'd have to pick up the pieces. That's a better account than any of the defenses I used to give, and I could never have arrived at it while I was busy defending. That's the thing about the whole of tonight's list, if you want it in one sentence. A man who is defending a thing cannot examine it. 9 years I explained why I talked to my wife, and not once in all that explaining did I work out what it was for. I got that in about the 5th year, standing in the shop, on an afternoon when nobody had asked me anything at all. And there's one last thing about number 9 that I've never said out loud, and I'll say it here. I'd not have told you any of this 5 years ago. Not because I was ashamed exactly. Because I'd have had to defend it. And defending it in front of a great many people would have been more than I could manage, and so I'd simply have left it out. Which means that everything I've been able to say on this channel about the talking and about the notebook and about what the quiet in this house actually contains, none of it would exist if I were still explaining myself. I gave up the defense and got the thing itself back, and then found I could hand it to somebody else. Marie put her fork down over a sandwich 4 years ago because I said one sentence without an apology attached to it. I have no idea how many people have written to me since about the same thing. That's what the defense costs, in the end, and it's the largest bill on this list. It isn't your piece, it's that a man who is defending a thing can never pass it on. And there is somebody out there tonight who needs the thing you're busy defending. So, 9 things. I like it here. I'm up at 5, so 8 suits me. It broke, and I never replaced it. I'd rather not. I like a roast. It's written down, and my children have seen it. I'm all set, thanks, good, and then nothing. And I talk to her most nights. 9 answers, and not one of them is longer than 8 words, and I used to have a paragraph for every one. I'll say the last thing plainly, because it's what I'd want somebody to take. None of this is about being closed off. I've got 5 people I speak to every week, and they get more of me than they did 5 years ago, not less. It's that I was treating every casual question as an examination for years without ever deciding to. And a man who is being examined 9 times a week is a tired man, and he does not know why he's tired. And he'd tell you it's his age. It wasn't my age. It was the accounting. Put it down. One thing at a time. Pick the one you're most tired of, and just stop. This week. And see what happens by Friday. Not all 9. 1. A man who tries to change 9 things about himself in February will be doing none of them by the Thursday, and he'll conclude he can't be helped. And he'll be wrong about that too. Mine came back the same afternoon. Every time. That's the whole of what I've got, and I'd not have believed it at 78. And I'll say the thing I'd want a man of about 75 to hear. Since he's the one this is really for. You're going to be asked to account for yourself more in the next 10 years than you have been in the previous 40. That's the plain shape of it, and nobody mentions it. A man of 50 is not asked why he lives where he lives, or why he goes to bed when he does, or how he's getting on. He's simply a man going about his business. Somewhere past 75, all of it becomes a legitimate question in other people's minds, and it comes from love about 90% of the time, and it does not stop. So you'll need a policy, not an argument, a policy. Something short and pleasant that you can say without heat and without a speech behind it. Mine is 9 sentences long in total, and every one of them is under 8 words. And it has given me back more of my own week than anything else I've done since Helen died. Write yours down if it helps. I did, on the yellow pad in the kitchen drawer, about 2 years ago, not as a script, just so I'd have the plain version to hand instead of assembling something under pressure at a counter. That sounds like a foolish thing for a grown man to do, and I'd recommend it to anybody. Because the trouble with these exchanges is that they're quick. Somebody says a thing, and you've got about 1.5 seconds, and 1.5 seconds is not enough time to invent a short, pleasant answer. It's exactly enough time to reach for the speech you already have. So change what's already there. That's the whole method. 9 short sentences, learned once, and then a man can go into a hardware store as a man rather than as a case. If what stayed with you is number 8, if you've noticed you're forever proving you're all right, I made another talk about exactly that. About the 5 things you can do that mean nobody has any business pitying you. It's right there on the screen. The kettle's still warm. I'll see you there.